in the room today, and we're going to talk a little bit about the vision that he had for CAST when he and a small team from North Shore Children's Hospital started CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technology, with the aim to innovate technology and to use the latest from brain science to really help us ensure that we're removing barriers so all learners, I'm talking about every single learner in the world, can access and gain expert learning skills. So David, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Great to be here. Thanks, Allison.
Yeah, so before we get started, before we jump into this conversation, we do want to invite you all. Thank you all. Oh, look, Anne is on. Hi, Anne. Anne Meyer, other co-founder of CAST. Great to have you here. And I see we have folks from Chile and all up and down the East Coast, Central. It's probably a little early for California and some other folks, but thank you for being here. Before we get started, we do want to invite you to contribute to the conversation. You're welcome to use the text chat. You just open the chat panel from the upper left corner of your Zoom window. And be sure to choose all panelists and attendees if you want everyone to hear what you have to say. If you do have something that should only go to us as panelists, something that you think might derail or distract the conversation, please post just to panelists, and that would be really helpful for us. So as we begin, we want to initially invite you to contribute to share a behind-the-scenes moment you may have had with David Rose. And already we have some interesting ones, like to ask you about how the cheeseburger special allowed years of self-regulation for you, David. So really, sky's the limit about what you may want to share in terms of a behind-the-scenes moment you've had with David Rose. All right, so as you're doing that, and we shoot to begin, are there any pressing questions? Everyone's good. So David, I'm going to model the conversation today because you've actually taught me to do this. I'm going to try to model our conversation today to align it with UDL and the nervous system. So we know that the nervous system initially is very goal-driven. So like the brain, I thought I would start with the goals and just ask, what's driven your work? Both then or maybe now, maybe it's something, maybe your goals have changed from then and now, but what has driven your work, would you say?
There's the CAST insignia, first time we ever had one. We don't use it anymore. And on the back, I don't know if I can do this. All the people that were employed by CAST in 1994.
Excellent.
I won't bother to let you read that. But it's a wonderful moment to be here and be able to have a chance to chat with all of you. And Allison's going to direct me so I don't go too far off track. Okay, so back on track. The first question was what drove your work, my work? I think the main thing that drove it was the savage sense of inequality that lots of people recognize. I was born into the world in an incredibly great family. My mother was a teacher, my father was a minister. They were well respected in the community. They had mission-driven lives. I had a great sister, Jan, who cared for me and all sorts of things. So I came in with a, as we say now, a very full backpack. I was very fortunate right from the beginning. And we tended to live in small towns, which was also great because you got to know everybody, even people that weren't like you. A lot less that confusion that we now have. You pretty much get everybody in town. And I second the piece of fortune. I got to go to Harvard, got an education there, which really was fabulous for me. And it was just right for me in lots of ways. I was very unprepared for Harvard. I was a terrible student for the first couple of years. And it took quite a while to get my bearings. So I got a feeling for what it meant to be part of the inequality myself. That is, there were students who were vastly better prepared than I was. And I really had a hard time. I didn't know what they knew that made them so smart, even. So Harvard was terrific for me. And in some way, I'm switching cameras.
Looks like mine's the only one working, so.
Oh. Okay.
As entertaining as I am to look at, I think they would much rather see you.
So I'm back on. So they missed,
so you're back on.
Missed my T-shirt. I came away from Harvard with this sense, I think, that everybody should have a chance to go to Harvard, but not literally Harvard, because Harvard's not right for everybody, and it's narrow in its own way. It doesn't prepare you for lots of things. It's, but it was right for me by the end, and I guess it alerted me to some of the inequalities. In spite of my wonderful backpack, I too could face inequalities in certain situations. And then with the privilege, the dramatic privilege of getting a Harvard degree, new things opened up, and it was educational intervention that opened up those things for me, and it was very powerful. So I think that got me really interested in education, what a difference it could make. I want to go back though just for a second to say, when I say everybody should have a chance at Harvard, it's that everybody should have a chance at something really fabulously challenging that's just right for them. So it's not Harvard, it might be the school, RISD School of Design, might be an apprenticeship with the best plumber in the city. It might be a excursion on a military boat. It might be the Peace Corps, but that everybody has a chance to get a really perfect challenge for them. And our schooling system, unfortunately, isn't designed that way. It provides high challenges for some kids and a lot of failure for others. So I was very, what should I say, I was very fortunate that I had a great backpack when I went to college. I went to a college that was just right for me and got me started. And after that, I saw the inequalities of people who didn't have either one of those, didn't have strong family backgrounds, didn't have an education that was right for them. And that's, I think, what's driven my work. Having parents, my mother a teacher, my father a minister, both of them really cared about those inequalities.
You've definitely talked about, just as a little aside, the apprenticeship model. I've heard you speak about that before, and what a valuable opportunity that is to really be able to push to expert level skills regardless of where that is. And I think that's something, in my experience, integrating UDL, that it really doesn't matter the context. UDL doesn't just apply to a classroom, but it really is a framework that can be used across so many different contexts. So I do think that that piece that drove your work is evident in the UDL framework and is evident in the work that you all in the field are really carrying out in so many different contexts. So that's really pretty exciting to know. And so to jump back to again thinking about our nervous system, and it's very goal driven. And our goal really is to be able to fill up these backpacks, to be able to have them be tracks that are right, that are equitable, and that are able to get all learners in a place that's challenging for them. So we know that there are always barriers, however, and UDL helps us to really purposefully remove barriers to support the systematic variability that we know will be inherent for everyone, for all of our learners. So for you, David, what has been one of the greatest challenges that you've encountered in your journey? We stick with that metaphor, the journey as you were filling your backpack, or what hole was in your backpack where things just kept falling out, or really prevented you from being able to achieve those goals you were shooting for.
So some of this will be obvious. By the way, I'm realizing how flat I am. I'll perk up over time, those of you who know. It's a little bit of a hard...
You don't have your big gulp here.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a hard day, so, but I'll be doing fine. I'm enjoying this if I look a little flat. Well, the most obvious challenge, of course, is that I'm not very technical. I don't, as everybody at CAST knows, I'm the trailing edge of the company in terms of my facility with any technologies. Mindy's here. Mindy has a weekly session with me just to give me a sense of basics and things like Twitter. So it's a little bit challenging to be the head of an organization for many years, which does things that you don't even understand. So that's certainly a major challenge. More generally, I guess, I was thinking about the challenge of an organization like CAST, and that the difficulty is that how do you match up the fact that you want to be a disruptive organization with the fact that you want an organization that people can live in and grow in and be a culture? And there are many people who are fabulous disruptors that are very difficult to have inside a culture because they pull and stretch and poke at the culture itself and are often abrade its very ability to be a caring and safe structure for everybody. On the other hand, if you have a caring and safe and fabulous culture, it can become inwardly focused and not disruptive on the real world, and not disruptive enough to keep its best people. So I think in the most general way, that's always been the challenge at CAST, is how to retain a disruptive edge without having it corrode on our own individuals. And similarly, how to make sure that we have a culture that disruptive people can be happy in. And I think that's a challenge that never goes away. And I look at other organizations, I see that that's often the case. And I don't think it should go away. I think it actually feels very UDL that there are times we need incredibly abrasive, disruptive people in order to make changes. And at times those people need incredibly supportive structures so that they can feel safe enough to innovate. So that contradiction, I think, will persist in any organization that needs to make change.
I know one of the things that reminds me of is you often tell the story of how the Rite of Spring, I think it's called, the Stravinsky's rites of, that people even walked out when that first was played, that they were so appalled at how different it felt to them. It's like it disrupted too much. But then over time, it really did start to change music and the way people listen to music. So finding that balance where people aren't walking out on UDL, that they're not walking out on their learners, but that they're really able to see this as something that can integrate into their culture, I think is quite a challenge, as you say. And to really be able to transition us to the next piece, you've learned, well, the brain science is showing that we know emotion is central to learning. One of the things that disrupted the field a little bit, I think, the UDL field, was when there was yet another version of the UDL guidelines that came up. People had really gotten to love that version 2.0. then you disrupted it a little bit with coming out with version 3.0, where you actually put emotion first. And that's something that I think really resonated with educators, but we now have brain science that's showing you don't have this little emotion center, but in fact, these networks are diffused and they're throughout the entire nervous system. So when you think then of being this disruptive force and thinking about then that important role for emotion in as being central to all of it, what's something that's really motivated you to always strive for a higher standard for all learners?
I think the early years, and it's embarrassing to say how few years I really taught in regular classrooms, but they were, as any good teacher knows, you, Allison, for one, and a lot of people here at CAST, teaching is an incredibly disruptive activity, and there are great highs and great lows. You can have the same day feel like you're the best teacher ever, and within an hour feel like you're the worst teacher ever. And that being on that disruptive edge, a little bit of the chaotic edge of growth, is what makes good teachers really great teachers. But it's stressful and challenging. And I think for me, the most dramatic, I wouldn't say it was a turning point, but where I really got how powerful teaching can be and how important it is to recognize the diversity of students was when I was a psychologist at Rentham State School here in Massachusetts. And that was an institution for the mentally retarded. And everybody in the institution was profoundly, or at least very severely retarded. I'm using the negative word on purpose here. These were all the people who couldn't be mainstreamed into the culture, supposedly, in those days. And the institution was, in many ways, horrific and degrading and frightening. And nonetheless, there were people there, and I'm thinking of one woman in particular, who just was an astonishingly good teacher. And with what looked like so little to work with, again, profound retardation, usually self-injurious and externally injurious behaviors, all kinds of things. She lit up with successes that she was having with these individuals. They were incredibly small successes to an outward eye, but she taught me how to look for those successes. And it was incredibly powerful to see what a great teacher she was and how motivated she was. And after seeing that, it's hard to get discouraged by a student who doesn't do their homework one night. And you just are a changed person. You just feel like, oh my God, if Esther could do that under those conditions and with those individuals, I ought to be able to do this. And that was oddly enough, a pivotal moment. And it's one of the reasons I think it's really good for all of us to teach sort of many different levels of education. I learned as much about education in that institution as I did at Harvard University, for sure.
Now, was that before you were a teacher yourself, or was that after you had taught?
Well, of course, this is embarrassing, Allison, that I have to think about what order things happen here. So that was after I had been a regular classroom teacher.
Okay.
The first time.
Yep.
And I'd gone back to become a clinical psychologist, and I was doing work at the Developmental Evaluation Center clinic in Children's Hospital. And I chose to work at the institution to, I think, as much as anything, to get a feel for what does it look like when it's really hard.
Yeah, and so one of the comments that came in from the field, we announced that this webinar was happening, and we got some questions, was just how interesting it is that when you talk about your teaching experience, and it's just resonating with me now as you're talking about observing this other teacher in practice, just how long ago it was that you really started thinking about what is now UDL. And when you reflect on your own career path, I guess, were there moments of insight, like you're saying, that really stand out to you a little bit as core, as really central to the teaching practice?
I'd have to think more about that. I think it was more gradual than that. And UDL didn't come from me, it came from that wonderful group that I'm sure we'll talk about that founded CAST. And it was a social construction. And it wasn't some imaginative thing that came out of somebody's head in a moment of sheer innovation. It was gradual hard work by people who really cared about what they were doing. And for a very long time, I guess maybe the camera wasn't working when I showed my
Yeah, show it again. That would be great.
Maybe I'll show it at the end. But a lot of those people are still at CAST from 35 years ago. And it was much more gradual as we, I like Chris Dede once described, I know you know this, but CAST is like a junkyard dog. And he meant it as a compliment, but that we were driven by a goal we wanted to achieve, which is better education, especially for kids who have traditionally been not served well, kids in the margins and so on. And what CAST did over the years was continually try to get better at doing that. And so at first we were clinicians. We worked on making the kids, have better everything from motor function to cognitive function. And over time, though, as we chased that problem, we more and more contextualized it and saw what was happening in schools, and that it turned our lens away from what's wrong with these individual kids to what's wrong with this learning environment that they're in, that they aren't making as much progress as that wonderful woman, Esther, I told you about. She could make progress in the institution with profoundly retarded individuals. How could kids look like they weren't interested in learning in a high school in suburban Massachusetts? So we were pretty focused on that, but the target of our focus changed from what's wrong with the kid and how do we fix it to how do we make better learning environments that are going to work for everybody. And so UDL came really fairly far along in that. We didn't have a term for that. I think a lot of people know that. It's also interesting how much happenstance. We happen to have a board member who was an architect, just sheer luck. And when she heard what we were doing, she, for the first time, said, wow, there's a guy who talks about universal design in architecture. And he was coming up to a conference she was going to, so she brought me. And so, I'm blocking on his name.
Ron Mace.
Ron Mace. Memory goes. So,
you got Esther's. That was awesome.
Right. So I met Ron Mace, and we showed him what we were working on. He says, wow, that's universal design. He didn't know for learning. Anne Meyer came up with the universal design for learning, but he knew what we were trying to do was what he was trying to do with buildings and architecture. And that gave a word for what we were doing. But I don't think I could say there was a moment or an event or something like that turned us. It was sort of hard work and keeping I was going to say mad dog, but that's not it, junkyard dog, on what would work better than what we're doing now. And I think that focus of just something must be better than what we're doing, and eventually came to UDL.
And so initially then, in universal design for learning, was there ever a debate about calling it universal design for learning? Was that ever a point of contention?
I'm sure it was, because we, of course, didn't know it would take, and we were fooling around. Probably Anne can give you a better history of that. But I will say, and it's important, I think, for people who are starting their own organizations to know that the change from being clinicians who treated children who had disabilities to what the work became was not without major challenge. And that some people know the story, but not many. But we had people that were extremely unhappy with the change from, we were all clinicians, that's what we did for a living, and we evaluated and helped kids who had disabilities in a hospital setting. And the change to viewing our targets as schools and learning institutions meant that there was great unhappiness. And I guess I would like to expose this so people are aware that some people were extremely unhappy and revolted. They really acted out and just were infuriated.
Like the Rites of Spring, they wanted to walk out of the...
Point. They did walk out. We lost some people who just said, this is not what we do. And they really wanted to see an individual child in a clinical setting and fix them. And they thought what we were doing was completely, A, not going to be successful, but B, also wrong-headed. And they were angry because they were actually cared about their work too. And they walked out. And the Stravinsky example is a good one. They walked out, and we were horrified that people would be that angry. And it was actually central to what became CAST.
Mm-hmm.
We had to make that transition, and we finally had to make it fully. We had to leave hospitals, we had to stop being clinicians, and really become educators and focus there.
So you left that context of the hospital, and then what was the change in context, just physically for you all? So you weren't in a hospital anymore, but there's not a UDL school, for example. So how did that shift happen?
Again, it's kind of more gradual than immediate, but we moved to what's now a video store in downtown Salem, and it had a few offices and a big room, and that was it. But it was separate from the hospital.
Okay.
And so it was our first time to feel not exactly a hospital, but we were still at that point actually a facet of the hospital, and most of us still had jobs in the hospital because when we started CAST, our first annual budget was $15,000, a very nice grant that got us started, but none of us could survive on it, so we all had regular jobs, and CAST grew slowly. But we moved from the video store later to a business office building. Had half of a floor on that, and got to paint it ourselves and things like that. And that felt really great. And then we outgrew it and moved, as you know, to our present space.
And so when did you say we are in an organization that we're now calling CAST? So when did...
Oh, that's the part that's on my shirt. So we officially dated as in 1984. We had started to stew about it in 83, which was largely a group of 5 of us who met after work. We call it the Pizza Parlor Era, where we met in the pizza parlor across the street from the video store. And we had, that's interesting, I've never told this story outside probably, but we had to meet in the pizza store because what we knew in some sense what we were plotting. And so we needed to be off-site of the hospital and even of its outlying building. So we would meet in the pizza parlor. Now, we never knew we were really going to split off or we were really going to do, a completely separate organization. But we at least had the sense we're not really talking about the clinic here. Mm-hmm. So we went to the pizza parlor.
And that's what we're having for lunch today.
Pizza.
Celebratory. So we hope all of you have some pizza today to celebrate as well. And so, CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technology, if you were to name CAST today, do you think it would still be CAST?
No, I'm sure we would have a different name. And, it's like every other organization, you get stuck with your name. And we're fine with it, but we don't like people that actually even say it out. When I get introduced, people say the Center for Applied Special Technology, and I go, oh man. We CAST, we just like it, like IBM, we just hope people will forget. I mean, it's not that it's awful or anything, but it was the best we could do in the pizza parlor. Mm-hmm. And now if we were starting whole cloth, we'd probably name it something else.
And universal design for learning. Do you have second thoughts about that?
Actually, I think that's great.
Universal is working. The universal is a big one. That's, again, keeping to that we're trying to fill the backpacks of everyone, literally everyone.
And I like, actually, the universal carries one big set of meanings for us. That's great. Design carries a second set of, and I think we're increasingly seeing ourselves as a design organization. Even the way we do research and all of that feels more like design-based research, and that's a good direction. So having design in our title feels great. And of course, having learning as the key word. So those three words are pretty okay. I don't know if everybody feels that way, but I feel that way.
No, that's excellent. And really, the other part that's interesting too, that a number of folks commented on when we were sharing about this webinar, you described that social construction. And one of the things that both past and current employees love is the focus on lunchtime conversations. And so I didn't know if you wanted to, just as a little aside here, talk about lunch. I know I'm often out walking, so I'm not always sitting there at that's my moving time. But
you're a problematic employee. But it is, actually that goes back to that original thought. The reason so for some of you who've been here and know that at least until fairly recently, the lunchtime ritual was a pretty important part of our culture. And if you ever come to CAST Space, you'll see that the lunchroom is at the center of the building, not in the back or hidden away as if it's messy. When you come in, you come into the sort of a relatively formal part, but at the center is the kitchen and places to eat. And it grew out of a sense that we eat together. That's a culture that whatever else we're working on, we should be able to come together and eat together. But that is an accident as much as anything. That when we moved to our first our own space, it was under construction. And so there were workers. And one of those canteen trucks would come by to service the workers. And I think everybody knows them. Roach coaches is another word for them. But they're the things you see at work sites. A metallic looking canteen site. And the guy opens up the sides and every kind of food that you shouldn't eat is available to you.
The fried Oreos.
And so he would come around and he would drive around the building and honk the horn so all the workers would know. And then we would go down to what he was having. We looked a little odd to him, but and we would order because it was way easier than going out to anywhere else to order something. So we'd go down and get our stuff off him. And but what it meant was there was a defined time for lunch. When the horn honked, you were in meetings doing whatever, but when he honked the horn, you knew it was time for lunch. So we would all go out and we'd all end up eating together. And that began that little piece of our culture. I liked it. I'm trying to think. It's too long a story. Then he started to know who we were, and he also ran a bookie operation out of the truck. There's a lot of interesting stories. Yeah. And I got some people know this. I just got to say because I've been so boring so far. When we were being inspected at that space, we just painted, got a new space, brand new, and we were delighted. And all of a sudden, a big phalanx of firemen came in with the chief to inspect 2 days before our opening. And we were like, whoa, there's all these people in uniform. And we were all excited, though. I forget, it was Ted Kennedy was coming. Somebody important was coming to our opening. I'm just really excited. And the fireman walks around. It only took us like 2 minutes to walk around. He says, you can't open on Friday. This building's not, whatever the word was, for not fire ready. And we were like, what? And he said, you can't open. And we were devastated. We didn't know what we were going to do. So anyway, I followed him. I didn't know what to do either, but they just marched out. So I followed the fire chief down, all the trucks are out there and everything. There's a picture of this, immortalizing it, which I think is great. So I go out and I go up to him and I say, look, you can't. And I just start crying.
Oh, no.
No, I'm just crying. Because I'm like,
it disrupted you too much.
Yeah, I'm just like, we were opening, we've got kids coming, we've got parents coming, we've got the Senator Kennedy coming, you can't, and I'm crying, literally, and there's a picture of me leaning over the hood of the fire truck, crying or something, and he says, I'll have to swear, he says, oh, God damn it, just get out of here. And he drives away, and witnessing the whole event was the roach coach driver. And I go over to him, and I don't know what just happened. And he said, David, didn't you understand? He was just, what's the word for, he was wanting me? A what?
A handout?
Well, more than a handout, it was a shakedown. What's the word? What's the word for that? He wanted me to pay him off.
Yes.
I didn't know. I was,
he saw the tears and thought, I don't even know how to handle that.
He couldn't handle it. So he just drove off and we never heard another word. And the roach coach had to explain to me. He was like, what's a bribe? He just wants a bribe. Because this guy lived in the real world. He understood how it works. And he said, you just give him $100 and it's fine. And I'm like, what? So here I was being educated by the roach truck driver. And he said, but he said, you know what? He said, that crying thing worked pretty good. He said, I'm going to tell my friends about that.
You got to the emotion, the core of the emotion in there. Well, and that also, I do remember hearing that almost every time that you moved, you were broken into because of the Center for Applied Special Technology. We think the technology in the title maybe made it a target for so all 3 times.
Yep.
Robbed every time.
Now we expect
interesting. So I guess to kind of jump back here to so we're in the nervous system and we're very goal driven, and we find that there's a little disruption to that, and we're trying to fill backpacks, and we're building towards this vision of all learners and feeling it out in lots of different contexts, from classrooms to your work as a clinician to now thinking broader in terms of all sorts of contexts, and emotion being at the core. To jump to the UDL action and expression principle, I thought we would jump to, what charge of action or advice do you have for us? Perhaps it's informed by something that you did right or that you think you did really well. But we're all pretty pumped about universal design for learning, and I mean, a lot of people say we've drunk the Kool-Aid. I'm not drunk, we've consumed the Kool-Aid, and it's delicious, and we want more. So to keep us disrupting, to keep us pushing, what advice or charge for action do you have for us?
Let's see. I guess one of the things that has made a difference here, I think, is maybe if I can personalize it, the thing that I think has allowed me to do relatively well is that I really like people, for one thing, and I really like people that are different from me. And people here, and hopefully no one will repeat this, know that I watch right-wing radio and television for my news, and I'm a flaming liberal. And I don't know, where exactly that came from, and my wife hates it, but the looking for what other people know and care about, and I think everybody knows here I'm a terrible gossip monger, so I want to know, how does it work? So the feeling of that I think has been a key part of our success, or let me just personalize it, because this is more about me, which is great. I love it being about me.
It's just for today, and then it's over.
Is that I always like to hire people who know things I don't know, and know how to do things I don't know how to do. And these are the three principles, those of you that are listening, and they care about things I don't care about. And CAST, I think, strength has been that we are not all the same people, and that we have rich, wonderful arguments here because we know different things. We know how to do different things, and we care about different things. And so if you're building a successful organization, so my advice would be to always look for people who aren't like you and who will balance out what it is that you can't do. I think there's a ton of people. I think that the original leaders, the five of us, really four of us, really had a different set of skills and things we knew and things we cared about, and that made all the difference. I think it's just fabulous that four of us have stuck together for over 30 years, and I think it's because we complement each other. We know there are things that the other people can do that we can't do. And I think some people think when they're forming an organization that they want a lot of people that are just like them. I think that's just a horrible idea, or that are juniors of who they are. And I think it's much better to look for people that complement your weakness. And I think everybody here, it's a legend. Linda Encarnacio is my assistant, and everybody knows that I'm quite helpless at doing the things she knows how to do. And similarly, when Ada Sullivan became our president here for a while, she knew things that none of us knew how to do. That made her really valuable. And I think that's
Can you
true for
speak
everybody.
to some of those four original CAST folks?
Oh yeah, I was definitely gonna go there.
Good.
This would
Let's
be
go
okay
there.
time. So there were 5 actual people who met in the Pizza Parlor, and one of them, husband moved to Hong Kong, and so she left very soon after the Pizza Parlor phase. So the 4 people that remained for the entire 35-ish years were Skip Stahl. I think a lot of people know Skip, and Skip's trajectory here was really fabulous in that he's really a behavioral guy. He really knows how to work with acting out kids, and was a clinician, obviously, before he came in. I couldn't help but think when Skip was wrestling with all the 35 organizations or whatever to make NIMAS, that this was easy for Skip, because he dealt with really acting out adolescence. And that was true of a lot of the people at the table. They were just grown up acting out adolescence. And I think Skip's background was perfect that. Another one of the founders was Grace Mayo, and people I think know her. And Grace was and is a fabulous teacher. She brought that whole much deeper experience in actual teaching and curriculum and things like that with us. And she also, though, was a really heart and soul of the place, that she made us feel like family. She was great at raising her own family. I think some of you know she took a 12-year leave because she wanted to. We were working all the time. It was, at the beginning, it was really hard, long hours. And Grace realized, I can't do this. It's not the right time. So she took a long leave. She'll probably correct me later about how many years it was. And then she completed that project, which she wanted to be her number 1. And she came back, and she works just as hard now.
She was the first one to reply to, are there any questions? She was there at 7 a.m. on her email.
Oh, okay. So Grace was really a heart and soul that kept us together as a family and cared about us. She was also the first person to say to me, David, you need to grow up. We need you to be our executive director, when we were at a kind of crucial point where we were all trying to be a committee as a whole. And Grace said, David, you need to be an executive director. And she didn't mean it
You were the frontal lobe. Oh, okay.
No, she just wanted me to get, stop trying to be an ingenue, and that he needed me to be in a different role. And I took it to heart. That Anne Meyer, and I have to say, without Anne Meyer, no CAST. She's the person that really started the idea. I think if anybody said, let's go to the Pizza Parlor, it was undoubtedly Anne. and she marshaled resources, but mostly what Anne brought was a sense of urgency that the rest of us might have talked about it a long time or thought about it or whatever. And Anne continually pressed to, no, we need to make something happen. And we need to do it now. We need to, if we got to leave the hospital, we got to leave the hospital, but we have things we want to accomplish. And her sense of urgency was critical. And back to that balance we talked about at the beginning, we both needed grace in her sense of family. And let's all be a socially strong and helpful to each other.
And she did always bake good food too.
Yeah, and brought great food. And while she's part of the kitchen and all that. And Anne brought great goal directness. Yeah, but okay, we need to perturb the system. We need to make changes. And Skip grew over time to become this very leavened, thoughtful, and easygoing but strong leader nationally. And that mix was the delight of my career, to work with those four people that long. And I'm not sure we ever had a really bad fight in all those 33 years. We certainly disagreed, and it would be crazy. If we hadn't disagreed, we wouldn't have gotten where we were. But I think what kept us together is we were all very goal-directed in our own ways, and we just had different means for achieving, just like UDL.
Yeah, so I'm even visualizing the brain, thinking the brain is very goal-driven. You all had that at your core, and then you're each representing these different networks working together. And if there had been brain damage, if something, one of those had left, it wouldn't quite be the same functioning machine. So that's pretty remarkable, and really remarkable to withstand so much time and change, as you're saying, as the model needed to change, as the system needed to change, as the field grew. And I'm sure you felt pressures from the field to really be able to come back to that core is pretty unique and remarkable. So in terms of advice then...
Everybody should have one of these where people say nice things to you while they're interviewing you.
Actually, we should do one of those, one of those roasts where sometimes before people get married now, they roast each other as much so you get it all out. So, okay, that can be our next webinar. So you created a culture of learning with engagement at the core, both here at CAST. Actually, I remember when I started here, I only worked until 2 o'clock and felt like I needed to work through lunch so I could be super productive. I could get lunch at 2.
Oh, I never understood that.
And you knocked at I was in this funny little space one day, and you said, no, actually, lunch is more important. You need to come to lunch, which was fantastic. And it struck me that it wasn't about the productivity. I knew people were working 24 hours a day, but actually, when it came right down to it, it needed to be about that engagement piece. And so this is a culture that is now expanding globally, where we really are trying to be modeling that goal-driven engagement at the core. And many viewers wanted to know, what will be the headlines for UDL or learning in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well,
and maybe this is where something negative, this could be where you get roasted or something.
Yeah, well, sure, that will happen. And I'll say just a couple things, I guess. I think we all hope that the UDL ideas and framework and so on will just be embedded in the way that people do everything, the way, movable seats and adjustable seat belts are in every car, and you don't notice it. Think about it. And I think the success will come when people really don't notice they're doing UDL, that it's just part of the way that we consider doing instruction. What that will look like, I don't think is any longer for me to say, and that's what retirement's about. So I want to put in a plug for, I'm going to start a blog. I think you know this, right, Allison? And it's really going to be a chance for me to have a continuing outlet. won't be paid for doing it, so I won't care if I miss deadlines or anything like that. But just to continue to, think and work with great people. So I'm going to invite leaders in the field to pose thoughts about the future, and I think I'm going to call it. I haven't absolutely focused, but I think I'm going to call it First Draft, and it's sort of like, here's some ideas I have that are a first draft of the future, but here's other people that are already in the field and are now the leaders, and here's their first drafts, and then have it be where everybody can comment and criticize and argue about that first draft, essentially edit the first draft. But anyway, I have a sense that I'm part of creating that future, but I don't think it'll come out of my head. I think that I might be able to prime that pump, but I think it will come in the interchanges around, here's a thought, what do the rest of you think? And I was just, I've been working with Jenna here, Jenna Gravel, about an article we're doing, and came up to me again with her, we should put out this first part out on the blog so we get people's feedback and find out if we're on track or not. And I think that would be, I sort of think that's a nice way to write articles in the future anyway. You sort of right now, you write the article in your closet, and then you put it out and you get feedback. And I think the modern world is much more, here's my first draft, tell me what's wrong with it and so on. So it's a much more organic living document. So I want to go to that kind of thing. And I think the future is going to be made by people other than me now. And I hope to be learning from them as I'm working on my blog and doing a few other things.
And I would just say selfishly, I hope your blog is disruptive and is really pushing that innovation and pushing that, that combative kind of conversation that you thrive on either listening to or engaging in, that I hope that some of that blog will be that for us, because I do think then we're hitting all those margins, we're hitting those most difficult places, and how can we keep ensuring that we really are getting to those margin places. One of the things that I think often surprises people to learn about you, and you share this often in your class and when you're out in the field, and that's how nervous you get before you present. And when, it's often very surprising, sometimes very comforting to people to know that, because what you deliver is so strong and often so powerful. So I think as you're thinking about this blog, I know selfishly, I would love to know that nervous piece. I would love to know that edginess that you might be feeling before you put it out in the field, and it might look calm and collected and really together. So do you have a headline for us?
So I want to go after that for just a minute.
Yeah,
that's
great.
very important. So, I joked at the beginning, but so I was nervous doing this. I have a hard time getting started. And I do, as you know, and Mindy knows, I spend a whole class session usually talking about how nervous I am before class. And it's largely, there's two reasons. One is largely to expose that so people realize, wow, I didn't think I could be a speaker because I'm nervous. And I want people to realize, actually, I'm just as nervous as you are, and remain so after 40-ish years of doing this. And I often quote Bill Russell, who used to throw up before all the big Celtics games, and he was the best basketball player without question in his time, and he would just throw up with anxiety. And so I say, I try to talk about, and Ledoux and other emotional neuroscientists talk about how that nervousness is really a powerful force to use. And if I'm not nervous, I actually do much worse than if I'm nervous, because it just means I'm not really into it. And so the nervousness is part of being successful. The second reason I talk about it is because I have strategies. I have things I do to allow me to talk. And you alluded earlier to that for, 20 years, 30 years, I always got the same cheeseburger special every day before class. because I didn't want to think about what I was going to order. I didn't want any more decisions. I just needed to focus and narrow in, and getting a cheeseburger special without any thoughts or whatever allowed me to concentrate. And the great thing was that the wait staff at the restaurant knew exactly who I was. This crazy person who comes in, he doesn't talk to anybody, and he looks weird, and we just bring his cheeseburger special. So they never, for 20 years, no one asked me what I wanted. They just brought me, when I walk in, the owner saw me come in, and then people would just start making my cheeseburger special. And that was part, I mean, there were many others, some of them less socially acceptable, that I would do.
That will be in the next webinar as well. We'll get that one out. We'll get that one out. Because then, you know, the context really does drive that nervous system. So it's, you know, developing that context is really important. Well, we have one last principle for those of you who are tracking the principles. We've hit on goals, variability in terms of engagement, action, and expression. And so in terms of representation, we want to know, so we can continue to build our comprehension. What are you reading these days? What do you recommend?
Well, my wife, of course, thinks that I don't really read, because I don't read novels and poetry and things that I should be reading. So largely nonfiction. And I just quickly looked, because you told me you could ask this, and I looked at what's in my Kindle.
Oh, great.
And so probably this will be obvious, and I won't make any point of it. I bought recently The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and also Mein Kampf, because I want to know, how did it happen in a very sophisticated country where people were intelligent and so on? How did that go that way? And I just want to know more about that. Just to show I'm not only doing useful or whatever, important things. Another book that I bought was called Meathead, the Science of Great Barbecuing and Grilling.
Oh, excellent. Appropriate for summer.
It's great. Yeah, it's a scientist and a chef combined to talk about what happens when you really grill a good hamburger, and I'm loving it.
Fantastic.
And I know you would want me to, I have a couple of brain books, and you can see why I would be interested in this one. There's a fairly recent one called Harnessed, How Language and Music Mimic Nature and Transformed Ape to Man.
Wow.
I've always had that interest in music, so combining language and music.
I would think you would write that title. That's so interesting. Yeah.
And I don't know, not last, but everybody here knows that I'm a junkie for love stories. And so there's a good book called The Anatomy of Love, A Natural History of Mating, Marriage, and Why We Stray. God knows what that. But I'll do that. And Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, I notices on there. Lastly, at my college reunion, I went to a fabulous talk by a physicist that I just have to buy her book, and it's called Dark Matter and the Dinosaurs.
Oh,
and she's one of the best speakers about this I've ever heard. So a mixed polyglot.
Okay. Well, that's given us a good point. I don't want this conversation to end. We're at time. And so what I'm going to say is this conversation won't end, because you're going to be on your blog, and we're going to be able to continue to stay in touch. David, I hate to, like, do you have any last words or any favorite quote or favorite moment, or I don't even know how to say goodbye. So I'll turn it to you to say, do you have any knock-knock jokes or?
No. Well, let me just, what would I say to this? Oh, yeah, I do have something I'd like to say.
Okay, great.
Say something quick while I'm...
Well, so while he's coming up with that, we do want folks to know that they can follow the symposium with the hashtag UDL for Justice. It's sold out for this year, but we are so excited and really look forward to seeing a lot of you there. We have a really exciting opportunity in September. BCSC out in Indiana is allowing us to come to site to see UDL in action. We often hear educators say, we want to see UDL in action. This is a district that has integrated UDL at every level. So join us September 19th and 20th to be at the BCSC site for a day of learning and a day of getting into classrooms in different contexts. And feel free to visit these other CAST research and development, professional publishing. Actually, I just am holding a new publication from Liz Berquist in my hand for the first time. I can't wait to read it, so congratulations, Liz. And so now back to you, David. I'm sorry, we'll be one more minute just to get this last bit. Oh, and look, Aaron's even on. Hi, everyone. This is great.
Aaron, hi. So the future, I just want to be clear that all of us made a lot of mistakes, and in fact, I don't think you can be a disruptive organization without making mistakes. And you had earlier said, think about what things you're disappointed about. And there's many of them that we, certainly didn't get to talk about. But I guess I wanted to say something positive about those mistakes, and that they're essential ways in which we learn from our failures and stuff. And that I wouldn't want to change any of them now for what has turned out. I'm very happy with the end, but there's a wonderful poem that captures this. So I'm just going to read the first sentence.
Yes.
And I'll tell you who it's by so you can look it up and see the whole thing. It's called Thanks, Robert Frost, by David Ray, R-A-Y. Thanks, Robert Frost, by David Ray. I'm just going to read the first long sentence. And the title is Thanks, Robert Frost. Do you have hope for the future? Someone asked Robert Frost toward the end. Yes, and even for the past, he replied. That it will turn out to have been all right, for what it was, something we can accept. Mistakes made by the selves we had to be, not able to be, perhaps, what we wished. Or what, looking back half the time, it seems we could so easily have been, or ought. The future, yes, and even for the past. I love it. It's a beautiful sense. So I have hope for the future because of all the wonderful people that some of which are on this line, and I have hope for our past as well. I like to think in all of those mistakes, it was all worth it.
Thank you so much. We look forward to the next steps. Thank you all for joining today. We'll see you next time.